Okay, so the process started with once I knew what the legal requirements were, which is to have either served in the Armed Forces of Ukraine for 3 years or more, or have received a state award or higher. For me personally, I had received a state award, and that made me eligible for citizenship. Once the process was ready to begin, then I accompanied our unit lawyer to the immigration offices to begin the paperwork. I believe personally that it was pretty simple and straightforward. I don't know what the entirety of the legal procedures would be for someone outside of the military. So for us, it seems like a pretty expedited process. I will say personally, there were a bit of complications because of my name. My legal name has 4 parts to it, so it doesn't follow the typical Ukrainian first name, last name patronymic. So there was some confusion because I'm a junior. On one ID, it spells that out. On another ID, it says JR. So for the legal process, they look at that and they go, well, these are 2 different names. It was solved and everything is good now, but that was an interesting little hiccup for my process personally. I haven't heard of any difficulties regarding the process for citizenship. I know that there's a significant number of people who have applied because they meet the basic requirements. I know for me personally, I had initially applied in September of last year, and it was actually approved rather quickly. It's just obviously for the paperwork to get all the way back to me, it takes, the process. It goes to one office who stamps it, it goes to another office, they stamp it, they send it, and so on and so forth. I personally don't know anybody who has applied for it that either has not received it or is being put into a position where they can't receive it yet, if that makes sense. So far, everything that I have heard, it's been a pretty linear process and it's been working well. It is a paperwork process. So if there is a person, whether it's myself, because at one point I have to go get a bunch of documents, right? I have to get certified copies of the award and my military ID and my contract and a notarized translation of my passport and then the photos. That makes the process take a long time. So I haven't received my Ukrainian passport yet. In fact, on Friday, I did the photos for it. It was really awesome because becoming Ukrainian has been such a critical goal of mine. In fact, most of my future that I have planned that I want to do hinges on me becoming a Ukrainian citizen. So having gone to the immigration office just a couple days ago and sitting in the chair and getting the form that says, like from the president's office, you've, received your citizenship on this date. Like that was a huge moment for me. And then going to the next immigration office in Podil and sitting down to take the photos. It was sort of a surreal moment because I take my photo and I see the form and it has my name in like the Latin alphabet. And then next to it, it's in Cyrillic. And I'm just like, oh shit, this is actually happening. Like, this is fucking cool, The way that I look at it is I've always been a soldier. I've been a soldier for a very long time. And it was more and more of a feeling of belonging to something other than just like, oh, I'm just a soldier in the military, but like belonging to a nation and the people as I've served out here more and more. Since I've received citizenship, and even really before then, for me personally, it was more when I began the process to receive it. When I first submitted all the paperwork to immigration, that I really started to sort of feel like I belonged to the country of Ukraine, and that Ukraine was my country. I say my country because my intent with the citizenship, it's not just to have the citizenship, it's to make Ukraine my home. Bridge building that the Marine Corps had done, but it all fell into the purview of being a combat engineer. Again, I did that for 8 years, didn't have any combat deployments while I was in the Marine Corps. And then I left the Marine Corps in March of 2021. And then I came here to Ukraine to begin working as a sapper in February of 2023. For me, I would say it never starts, it never stops. Once you begin training, don't ever stop. Don't ever think you know enough. I learned a good amount of explosives use, whether that's just safe handling practices or combat employment skills during my time in the Marine Corps. When I came out here to Ukraine, I realized just how little knowledge in the grand scheme of things I had, because in my prior military service, I only used US munitions, right? US plastic explosives, US detonators, US time fuse. You come here and you have this mix of materials from a vast variety of countries. I mean, I've used explosives that they're plastic explosives from like 9 or 10 different countries. All of them are slightly different. All of them perform better for certain tasks. As an engineer, though, there's also the aspect of you never really know the best way to do something. So my biggest message for engineers and sappers especially, because of the constant advancement and evolution of the warfare here, never think you know the best way and never think you know enough about the job. Always search for new manuals to read. Always talk to people that have more or even just different experience than you. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. There are people who've been doing it for significantly less time than me, but I still can learn from them because what they have done has been different from my experience. I didn't want to come out here and say I can only do 12 months and then I have to go back to the States. What Russia was doing was just absolutely appalling. It was disgusting. So morally, I felt like, you know, I had to do something because I had the ability to do something. I viewed it as the idea that Ukraine was forced into a situation it didn't want to be in. And there were young and old, men, women, children of all ages, who were suffering the repercussions. But from the militaristic standpoint, there were people who had never wanted to be in the military, who had never wanted to know war, who had never wanted to know certain skill sets, being forced into that. Well, here I was, having the experience of being in the military, having skill sets that were useful, and not doing anything with it. So morally, why not? Why wouldn't I come help? It was something I was prepared to do and trained to do. So it just sort of made sense that if I could help, you know, even just save one person through a simple act, then it made sense to me. And attempting is just absolutely downright sickening. I think their push to create some new fucking Soviet era super control over the European continent is just appalling. They keep trying to take back what's theirs, you know, in their mindset, but they're wrong. It's not theirs. Ukraine was Ukrainian well before the Soviet era. It has its own rich history and its own tradition and cultures and people. So the idea that somebody would try and squash that and, you know, remove it from history was just disgusting. I don't think anybody was very surprised. They weren't very surprised. They were worried. You know, my family was proud of me because they felt that I was making the right decision. But again, they were worried. You know, I'd done 8 years in the Marine Corps, but I hadn't had combat deployments, right? So this was still something completely and entirely different from what I'd experienced before. It's war. It's inherently dangerous. People get injured, people die. So they were definitely very worried. But they supported my decision, which was the big thing. You know, not all of them necessarily agreed with it, but they still supported me doing it nonetheless. It was February of 2023. We were still fighting in and around Bakhmut. It was strange. It was weird. It was frightening. It was all new. Again, I'd come from serving 8 years in the Marine Corps without any combat deployments. And I had come into Kramatorsk late in the evening from Kiev, having just, you know, been issued like my weapon and my ID and all that other stuff. And then within 24 hours, I was sitting in a brief preparing to go into Bakhmut. So it was very surreal, you know. There was no amount of preparation that I could do to be completely prepared for it. It was just sort of the way I'd explained it to my previous team leader was like, hey man, Like, I'm good with guns and explosives, never had them launched at me, and I've never fucking heard artillery go off. I don't know, I might be okay or I might shit my pants. Like, we'll find out when it happens. Luckily I didn't, shit my pants, but again, it was still a surreal moment. I think for me, the biggest thing was being able to look around at the veterans who'd been in the war for a while and see how they react and then gauge my actions off of that. It was an interesting experience. I mean, it's changed my personal identity because I very much feel to be a part of Ukraine. Before I was just, an American volunteer who came to join and serve and assist in whatever way I could. Now, as a Ukrainian citizen, this is also my home. So it's completely changed my personal identity. I believe Ukraine has truly become my home. There are customs and traditions that I've come to love and admire. There are places outside of just the basic cities, like Kiev, Kharkiv. Everyone knows of Kiev, Lviv, Kharkiv. The only area in which I still feel as a foreigner is simply the language barrier. It is something that I'm working on now, and my goal is within the next year to be able to just maintain a fluent conversation. I don't really view myself as just this foreign volunteer anymore. This is my home. Yes, so my plans are to stay here. My aspirations, my goals and plans, they involve a wife and children, a house outside of Kiev, maybe not in the city, but on the outskirts, somewhere with a yard, a dog, a grill, make some shashlik on the weekend. And when it comes to work, I've become very, very passionate about the mine threat here in Ukraine and just how terribly impacted the agricultural side of things are, as well as just the humanitarian side of things. I mean, you saw it in Irpin and Bucha, mines left behind, injuring, civilians and children and old people who are just wanting to go through a walk in the park. You see vast areas of this country unable to be farmed anymore because of the mines in the ground, even if that area hasn't been occupied or under, Russian occupation for a year. It hasn't been cleared, so it's not safe to use, or the chemicals from the explosives in the mines have now caused damage to the soil and the earth. So that's the thing I'm very passionate about. So my intent is to remain in Ukraine and professionally work on trying to clear that mine threat as much as possible while I can. Yes, so once the war is over, I definitely plan on moving to the civilian sector. There are men in this country that aren't even Ukrainian. They're also foreigners. Or there are Ukrainians as well that I call them brother, and I mean that. I feel closer to them than I would, someone I'm biologically related to. Absolutely. To me, victory means a free and prosperous Ukraine. It means a Ukraine that is whole and not in pieces. A Ukraine that is, free to pursue its dreams and goals as a nation and as a people, while taking pride in its heritage and its language and its customs and its culture, without the fear and the worry that there's some impending doom, because of the fact that Russia has begun to invade and take territory that isn't theirs, not once, but multiple times. There's always the worry that it may happen again. To me, victory would mean a peaceful Ukraine with a peaceful future.